Welcome to the webinar, Cyber Attacks, Get Your Power Back, Understanding Ransomware and Data Extortion. This is a collaboration between Nexus IT Consultants. Wave hello, Earl. Myself, Nexus IT, J.R. Maycock from Perpetual Storage, Inc. Nice salute, sir. And then Jeff Smith of WebCheck Security. And then, of course, many of you know, as you're members of the chamber yourselves, that we have the great minds of Salt Lake State Chamber with us here as supporting and sponsoring this webinar. And with that, let's get started. Trying to decide who I pick on first here in the crowd. Why don't we go ahead and pick JR as the CIO of Perpetual Storage. I do have a question for you, but if you wouldn't mind, maybe go into a little bit of your background and what Perpetual Storage does.
Happily. My personal background is, well, I started in the corporate IT world for 8 or 10 years, have made trips through K through 12 education after that, and ended up in the service provider world now. And my areas of focus have often been on the connection in between system design or platform design and business strategy, trying to tighten up the relationship of technology to business outcomes, with a strong emphasis then on the cybersecurity bent. Perpetual Storage, the entity I work for now, is a data protection partner, effectively. We own a very unique business campus, an underground vault carved a couple 100 feet down into Little Cottonwood Canyon. And at that location, we provide both physical asset protection and digital asset protection, including running a data center in that underground area to help companies ensure they have instances of their critical data, critical assets held offsite in the safest possible place.
Fantastic, JR. Thank you. All right. I thought the way I would frame this would be a little introduction, then I'll go in with a question for you just right out of the gates. Question I get often is that the landscape out there seems a little bit different. Even in the last couple of years, we're hearing a lot more about ransomware, about cyber breaches on our critical infrastructure, on our large businesses and enterprises, on our SMBs, on our large organizations, our small organizations. So basically across the map. There's congressional hearings, almost once a week about what organizations could have done to prevent cyber attacks, how they handle those cyber attacks. So there's a lot going on in the space right now in terms of conversation, dialogue about how to solve the challenges, talent gap, solution gap, how expensive some of these solutions could be to implement. Who's going to pay for that? Bridging the gap between the private and public sector. Has anything really changed in your opinion, JR, or is this mostly just hype related to the current pandemic? Can you kind of speak to what your thought process is around what's going on in the landscape? And if it really truly is legitimate areas of concern or maybe hyped up by the media?
It can get difficult to disentangle those threads for sure. There is legitimate concern, and there is material difference in the experience of companies within the cyber threat environment in calendar year 2021 compared to just a short time ago. The nature of that difference is a conflux of a few factors. Many businesses now run all of their critical assets in digital form, the representations of their intellectual property, their physical inventory, their customer transactions, all of it is inside and living through computers. There is a lot more vulnerability and distribution of touch points for a business because of social changes and pandemic restrictions and remote work and content like that. So that certainly has an influencing factor. But the biggest change is actually the amount of money to be made by the adversary organizations who participate in cyber attacks. There is a very large market to attack companies and use sophisticated human-operated attack methods that extract ransom payments, either locking people out of their data and threatening that they do not get it back until ransom payments are exchanged for decryption keys, or extortion threats, exfiltrating copies of sensitive data and then forcing payment in order to prevent its release out onto public internet sites, competitors, other reputation damaging locations. And that's my take on some of those changes. I think the other person who I'd appreciate to hear their take on those changes, plus a moment of introduction, Jeff, why don't you tell us about yourself, why you're here talking today, and what you see as different in this threat environment?
Perfect. Thanks, JR. Yes, I agree. Go ahead, Jeff, take it away with an introduction and let us know your thoughts on the topic.
Okay, hi, I'm Jeff Smith with WebCheck Security. I've been in the tech industry. I'm sorry to say if I say this, it'll kind of date myself, but probably 35 plus years in the involved in technology, and that's everything from software development to large data warehouse and data networks, building technology related companies. So I've been in this space a long time, been in the cyberspace for about 10 years now. And my take on this right now is all the things that you're seeing out in the media and the news. You see the big things, you see the pipeline hack, you see the meat processing hack, you see some of those types of things, and that gets a lot of the big press. But what you don't see is the thousands of other companies that are being hit on a regular basis. And people say, am I a target? I don't think I'm a target. I don't really have anything that they need. If you've got a bank account and you do business on computers, and you're clicking on emails and doing different things, you are a target, because they, a lot of the times these bad actors are moving downstream. They focus on the big ones, and when they get one, great, but the smaller and medium-sized businesses are not doing things to protect themselves, so they're an easy target. So it is real, it is happening, but a lot of the stuff that I see, you don't see in the news, but it is happening.
Sure, absolutely, Jeff. Thank you so much. And I don't think 35 years dates you. It just makes you well established.
I prefer to say that I'm not old. I prefer to say that I'm wise.
Well, we need to average this webinar out a little bit between JR and myself. You know, we could use some expertise. 35 years is a lot of time to be around in this environment. You've seen a lot of things. I can attest to that. Thank you, Jeff, for that great take on the environment, the risks out there, who's impacted by that. Earl, CEO and founder of Nexus IT, I'll let you do an intro if you don't mind, sir, and then give us your take on the environment, how it impacts Nexus IT and the work we're doing.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, everybody, first of all, for being here. We're so glad to have you here today. Thank you to the panelists, to the Salt Lake Chamber for arranging this session. I do feel that this is a super important topic and session to be discussing. And I would echo the sentiments. I guess, first of all, you asked for an intro on, I am founder CEO of Nexus IT for the last 22 years since I founded this company originally with my brother as a partner. Have been owning, have owned and operated this organization. We at our core are a outsourced white glove IT support company with cybersecurity, compliance, and cloud, very centric to all of our programs and offerings. And we saw a significant need in the market to address the cybersecurity concerns maybe about a dozen years ago, and really started pivoting all of our products and services into that arena. So with the intro out of the way, I would echo the sentiments that have been shared here today, and I would say there is a very real heightened risk that is happening. 2020, we saw, if you look at the formal studies that are done by different types of research bodies, I think cyber attacks were up by like 80%. in in 2020, and in 2021 they're already way off the charts again. I don't want to go too deep or be redundant with any of the other comments. I think the one item that I've seen that has changed significantly, that I would like to highlight, that I've seen change over the last 12 to 18 months, is that the majority of ransomware incidents now are not only encrypting your data and trying to hold you hostage, so that you can become operational again. Of course, hackers are, in their own right, they are entrepreneurs. They are, and don't get me wrong at all, these are businesses, right? These are, yes, you have the one-off, 14-year-old kid in his underwear in his parents' basement that is buying ransomware as a service, but you have very sophisticated companies, organizations with hundreds or thousands of employees that are involved in cybercrime now. They of course evolve with the market, right? And what we're seeing is that while many businesses, their awareness is becoming significantly heightened around the threat of ransomware or other types of cyber attacks, and most organizations are getting more judicious about making sure they have good backups, that they have multiple tiers of backups. We're going to talk a little bit more maybe today about air gapping backups, which is JR's specialty. We're seeing that a lot of organizations have the ability now to recover in reasonably quick order from a ransomware incident without having to pay the ransom. So the hackers, the cyber criminals, see a problem, right? They see a revenue stream potentially drying up. So what do? They start now not only encrypting the data in your environment, but they are now exfiltrating your data. And so, which means they're stealing and taking that data offsite, copying it to some, server, some proxy, some cloud server that they have, somewhere in the world. And even if you are able to recover from the ransomware attack by utilizing, your backups or other disaster recovery methods that you might have, they are continuing to hold you hostage and threatening to release your sensitive data, the sensitive data of your employees, of your clients, your proprietary, trade secrets and that type of stuff on the dark web, if you do not pay the ransom. And actually at that point, they will heighten the quantity of the ransom they are asking for. So this is the big evolution that I've seen just, again, in the last 2 years maximum. Is it's not only a localized event, but they are now stealing that data. And that happened to a local university here, a very prominent local university here in Salt Lake. They had a ransomware attack. They were able to recover from backup, but the hackers said, we're going to release all this information from all your students on the dark web unless you pay $500,000. And so they did.
Wow. That is certainly devastating. I don't know how many business owners can afford the reputation loss, the financial loss, the downtime. This is scary stuff. In fact, if I'll bring in another piece of information, another statistic, as we're talking about ransomware, 11 seconds, it's been said that a ransomware attack happens, or another malicious event. Earl, I'm going to pick on you just a little bit longer. What can businesses begin to do to get in front of those attacks, to start protecting themselves? What would you say the first steps would be?
Yeah, really good. Thank you. And so there's a long list of best practices, right? We could go through, and I'm sure we'll go through, quite a few here, but we could go through several dozen things that businesses can and should do to protect themselves. For me, and I won't take all, the entire answer here, but for me, I think the first steps are to acknowledge the risk, because the reality is that most businesses, and particularly small and medium-sized businesses, still live in a false reality that they are not a target. Guys like Jeff and I, who are consistently dealing with even local organizations within Utah, can tell you that is absolutely not the case. on a weekly, if not nearly a daily basis, we are dealing with organizations who have been hacked. And there's a study done, it's several years old now, and so perhaps it's, the statistic is even more ominous, but in the state of Utah, as of 3 or 4 years ago, 3 out of 5 businesses in the state of Utah have been hacked. And again, I venture to say there's probably even more than that at this point. So acknowledging and then doing a gap assessment, a risk assessment, understanding what are we doing well and where are we super vulnerable, and then putting together an action plan to address those vulnerabilities in order of priority. What's our highest risk? Let's start there, and work through that entire, through that entire list. One of the very first things that you need to do. So in today's modern cyber attacks, statistics and studies will show that somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 to 95% of all of those attacks involve a human element. They involve social engineering, they involve malicious insiders, and so in today's threat landscape, the risk, your primary risk, are you and your own people. And I say you because honestly, we see so often, and Jeff can back this up, that the business executives, the leaders, are the ones falling prey to some of these what we call phishing or spear phishing campaigns. And so you've got to educate yourself and you've got to educate your team about the risks, how to spot them and how to avoid them. And that can be done really easily. There are really great, a lot of different offerings now with really great online modules that are very affordable. Like I'm talking $25 to $35 per head per year. Those are some of the first things I would do. There's a lot more, and I'll leave some for the rest of the crowd.
Fantastic, Earl. Thank you so much. It would be great to turn those internal threats to human beings that do make the mistakes of opening the wrong documents, clicking on the wrong links, to make them more defenders of the data than a risk. To find a way to do that through security awareness and would be fantastic. I imagine we'll be talking about that further. You're right, it's low cost, it's easy to implement. Good recommendations on how to get started, Earl. Jeff, WebTech Security talks a lot in the community and provides awareness about the new bill, House Bill 80, the Cybersecurity Defense Act that was just recently passed in Utah. Do you mind highlighting that bill for us? I think it'd be very advantageous for the leaders and the business owners on this call to understand how they can safeguard themselves in the event that they are a business victim of a cyber breach, how to protect the data that they're custodians of, how to protect their customers and clients, but then also how to safeguard themselves. Do you mind kind of walking us through that bill a little bit?
Sure.
Thanks, Jeff.
Well, this past legislative session, the House Bill 80 was passed, and it's in its simplest form. If you look at a couple of things that a breach exposes you to some liability, you've got the issues of recovering from the breach, so fixing your systems, restoring data, becoming operational again. The other part that you're exposed to and the risks are potential lawsuits from clients. If you've got partners that maybe you're using intellectual property or certain types of client data that can be used to extort you. When that information gets out, it exposes you to potential lawsuits. Mm-hmm. So not only are you dealing with the expenses of recovery, but then you've got potential litigation and issues that arise from that. And so what the state of Utah has done, if you're familiar with some other standards like the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, the California just passed a law a couple of years ago called the California Consumer Protection Act, CCPA. And what those are is they're standards that companies need that open up companies to potential litigation, because if you're not meeting those standards or you're doing those things, then it kind of gives the legal profession the opportunity to, say you're not meeting these standards, and so then you start to get lawsuits and stuff. levy against the company. So what the state of Utah has done is they've taken a more proactive stance to say, yes, we should be protective of the data, but we also need to find a way to protect our businesses so that, you know, the statistics are small businesses go out of business. I think I've heard that, you know, I've seen a statistic anywhere from 30 to 60% of them potentially can go out of business in the first couple of years from loss of brand, reputation, loss of revenue, and then all the other expenses associated. So the House Bill 80 is called a safe harbor or an affirmative defense law. And what it is designed to do in simplicity is to say, kind of to what Earl has already said, recognize that cybersecurity can impact your business, have a plan, and that plan is if you are trying to adhere to a specific standard, like if you're taking credit cards and you're under the payment card industry's data standard, PCI, or if you're, let's say you're a defense contractor and you're working to be NIST compliant, the National Institutes of, National Institute of Standards and Technology. If you, I'm trying to get some of the other ones. You got PCI, NIST. There's other standards. There's ISO standards, and there's also the CSI standard. That if you're trying to apply that standard to your company, and you've assessed your risks, and you documented that you've done so, and that you're taking steps. Now, granted, when you look at one of these standards and you do an assessment, like Earl mentioned, you do the assessment, there may be several gaps that you don't have the budget to fill all of them, but you kind of prioritize them and you start working towards them. If you do that and you show that you are doing something, really it comes down to companies are doing nothing or are they doing something? Mm-hmm. And the something is in House Bill 80 is, you know, have you assessed your risks? Are you trying to apply to a standard? And are you making steps toward achieving that standard? If you can show that you've actually recognized it and you're doing something, then you can potentially fall inside that safe harbor so that when litigation comes against the company, your legal representation should be able to show we meet this standard and that stuff should be dismissed. So it really is, and it can be done very affordably, and it's something that every company should take advantage of now that it's in law for the state of Utah.
Well, that sounds fantastic, Jeff. I mean, that really is good news for Utah businesses and Utah business owners. I'm proud that we're a front runner in this bill because it's a very digestible model. It doesn't have to be expensive. There are many line items in the bill that you can start to work on in-house, such as a written incident response plan. Basically, you know, you put a plan in place, you have an action of what happens if you are to get breached, because right now it's not a matter of if, it's when. I'd like to hear a little bit of thoughts from Jeff about a written incident response plan and some of these security procedures that can be enacted in-house starting today for Utah business owners, and then maybe switch over to JR when we're done and talk about when you are hit with a breach and a ransom request. How do you eliminate or reduce? How do you reduce and or eliminate downtime? How could the business owner be victorious in these events and not victims? So yeah, again, Jeff, if you don't mind kind of talking about some things inside of that bill that can be done in-house, I think we'll dive a little bit deeper into solutions and then also how to reduce downtime and data loss with JR.
Okay. If once you've recognized that this is something that is important to your company and you want to take those steps, it really is just a matter of looking at your technical risks and then looking at kind of your processes and people and what you will do. And really the plan that you would put together would be an exercise that if we were to have an incident, you know, you don't want to be scrambling and running around going, who do we call? What do we do? What's the next step? You want to be able to go over and break the glass, pull that document out and go, number one, we call our attorney so that everything from here forward is covered under client privilege. So you should have an attorney on a retainer or at least engaged with an engagement letter, somebody that knows you and is ready to be the breach coach from a legal perspective. You need to have someone like Earl's company, Nexus, that can consult with you, and with perpetual storage that consult with you on your technical side and put a plan together of what are the first steps that you would take to recover? What are the first things that you should do? And you have that step-by-step plan, both process, technology, and people, and then you should practice it. You should actually go through the exercise of, we've had the incident, let's run through it so that it's just kind of a natural thing. You'd be surprised the crazy things that can go on in that process, and actually keeping control of the information and educating employees about what should be done and said and not said publicly on social platforms, things like that. Once you've got that plan in place and you've exercised it and gone through it, then it actually is good, because just having the feeling that you're prepared and to know what to do when the crisis hits, that you've you know where the sandbags are, instead of running around going, do we have bags? Do we have sand?
Right, right, absolutely. Tabletop drills, I'm hearing.
JR?
Know what to do. And then JR, how do we reduce downtime? How can we take the power back? And we're going to dive into this, but in regards to data, this event happens that Jeff described. It's a moment that your team's been preparing for. I picture it, if they've been working with Jeff, Nexus IT, or with perpetual storage, the team's going to walk through it gracefully. Their breach coach or their attorneys on board, going through the steps, they're making the discussions, they're doing all the right things, right? But how do we secure that data and minimize the risks there and the downtime? Kind of talk through that, if you would.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks.
There's an assumption embedded in this question. It's that the business leaders have taken affirmative and intentional choices to prioritize these cybersecurity response plans, these cybersecurity postures. If we accept that assumption as written for a moment, we say, okay, the business has chosen to recognize the value and the importance of these capabilities, and to say, we want to be in charge. We want to win the fight that is inevitably coming to us. Then there are some concrete methods to have in place around the execution of the response plan that can help ensure that it gets to fruition, that it gets to that end state of being ready, safe, and restored, and you can stand your ground and stay on the side of the really critical stance. Don't pay the ransom. Just win the fight outright without having to pay the ransom on any front.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of concrete examples would be useful here. Vis-a-vis the threat of data extortion, data being stolen and ransom being levied against you in order to prevent the release of that data to sensitive places. The key steps are to use minimum successful data loss prevention technologies. That involves identifying what your key data is, what is sensitive, be it documents, be it databases, be it customer lists, and then applying the technological capabilities to keep it encrypted and to prevent it from leaving its native environment, where instead of a successful hacker just being like, okay, this is the stuff that I have found that is interesting and I will copy it out, and there is the ability to execute those copies and I can meaningfully use them. You put technologies in place that have the data not be able to be copied and exfiltrated, and to trigger many types of live alerts and warnings and actionable events to the eyes of the IT individuals and business leaders responsible for that data. If you have your critical data identified, you know what's inside of it, and you know you have these protection layers in place that make it very unlikely that exfiltration can happen and succeed, you can respond to the exfiltration threat without having to be on the back foot. You can respond to that threat by saying, nope, we know the maximum amount of damage that could have been done. It is not that bad. It is not that large, and we are refusing to give into that payment. If the threat instead is manifesting, or exactly at the same time is manifesting, as lockout of operational systems, a ransomware attack that blocks the critical business process supporting technology platforms needed for the company to operate moment to moment, day to day, then the response plan needs to rely on a different underlying set of elements. The most important element is about having a completely isolated backup copy of data that can be used to execute trusted restores. When professionals refer to backups that are air-gapped, that is a word that is coming from the network operations and particularly high security military or classified data environments. And it refers to places that data can exist that have no network connections to them at all. That there is a air gap in between the boundary of a system and the rest of the world that can be interacted or reached from the computers we all use day to day. A set of backups frequently refreshed to have your recent up-to-date data kept in a air-gapped environment is a vital mandatory minimum to being able to successfully respond in a affirmative and powerful way to an attack. We at Perpetual Storage are a provider who can implement that capability for companies and entities. But regardless of whether a company chooses to do it with us or another way, just ensure you are using actual, authentic, air-gapped offline copies, not partial technological substitutes, software-based immutability mechanisms, because those simply aren't good enough. The reason you need the air gap to exist is because cyber adversaries will be potentially successful in getting to all of the copies of your data that can be touched from any system. And they will be able to use the normally highly privileged administrative credentials, things afforded to people like systems administrators or information officers, to go and take actions to destroy those copies. They will be careful and deliberate in the timing of an attack, and they will, make sure that it is Friday before a long weekend, late at night, or they will target when vacation for critical stakeholders is about to begin. And that's when they'll choose to make sure that the backup copies and production copies are destroyed, deleted, and encrypted all at once. If you have these offline backups prepared and you have the incident response plan built to understand where your hardware restore environment needs to be, if you need to acquire alternative trusted hardware, if you need to use different models of immediate hardware access via co-location or via public cloud facilities, whatever that piece of the plan dictates, you need to then simply be able to connect the act of restoring your offline copy quickly in order to make sure that it comes back to life fast enough for business to be operating. You drop the known good clean copy back into a working production environment, and you have your employees resume working and doing operations from that clean state, minimizing the amount of data or transactions you have lost, and applying your incident response plan to know what the total timeline is, and know the graceful chain of command of who is responsible for what portion of the restore, and when these systems are back online, how are they going to be accessed and used? With the right incident response plan that genuinely doesn't need to be massively complicated, that can be built from just some common sense fundamentals, this can come down to an under 48-hour timeline or an under 24-hour timeline, and you can respond with a degree of confidence and certainty that is, well, it's very appealing. The moment the attack goes off and the production systems are compromised and encrypted and locked out, instead of having to negotiate with those attackers, you look at the messages that are now written all over your computer screens of pay us this ransom, here's the place to send the Bitcoins, and you just shut those systems off. Capture a forensic copy of them for later analysis, but you murder them yourselves. You do not care that they are in a damaged state. and you just bring back the right copy you need to do business and ignore the threat and the attempt to dictate fate to your business. You just get to take back that control.
I like it. That's fascinating, because we talked a lot about defensive positioning with multi-factor authentication, VPNs. We go through phishing protocol and protecting our email security, our firewalls, defensive, and this feels like the spot where the bad actor kind of fumbles the ball and the business owners recover, right? So we now have possession, and I love that perpetual storage gives business owners and leaderships that power, and at least puts them in the position to make a decision over paying the ransom or not paying the ransom. And that's not common, because you do listen to these congressional hearings and the FBI will say, don't pay the ransom, because it just encourages, it incentivizes. So it's nice to hear your take on that. It gives some power back. Appreciate that. Briefly, before we kind of turn this over to, I think Earl next would be best suited, could I kind of talk about what about the businesses that don't think that they're impacted, that don't think that they are custodians of data, how it could be a positive for their bottom line. But if you don't mind, JR, while we've got it on you, can you talk about the neat business campus you have? My understanding, there's only 4 of these unique sites in the world, and we have one in our own backyard in Little Cottonwood Canyon. Can you just describe what makes your operation unique and how valuable it is that we have a PSI in our state?
Yeah, so the geographic uniqueness you're referencing with only 4 sites has to do with the shape of a large monolithic laccolith, single contiguous unbroken piece of granite. There are 4 of them known to exist worldwide. The other 3 are generally located in national parks and national monuments. So the only one that is commercially developable is on the north side of Little Cottonwood Canyon, and Perpetual Storage built a campus there in the late 1960s. Operations were resumed or opened for business in 1968 at this vault. The vault facility is where we can hold the physical artifacts that matter to a company if they have those physical artifacts. Great examples are copies of the incident response plan, copies of your chartering documents, copies of your cyber insurance policies. There's a separate area outside the vault that is our data center environment. And that is where we can store data offsite for a company and then execute the offline copy functions on behalf of the company. The offline media gets stored downstairs into the vault for a company. Yeah, our facility is pretty interesting. It's a controlled access facility, no inbound radio signals, no visitors without previous permission, though we are always happy to have someone come up for a tour. And we think that there is a unique history and a unique degree of operational maturity with our company around the actual process of making a company disaster-proof. The fundamental logical analysis of how to respond with the business process is not different at the base archetype level between how do you handle an earthquake and how do you handle a ransomware attack. There are pieces of that response plan either way that rely upon resiliency and survivability of your data, your company, and your artifacts. And that's where our campus can come into play for sure.
I feel lucky that I've been able to get a tour. I can tell the crowd that it's a unique environment. I could attest to the physical security. It was great going in, yes, that you will be met with by armed guards. So, don't turn incorrectly when you're going up skiing on Sunday. But I could tell you that there's some fascinating artifacts there. Most of the world's most important documents are stored there. And it's a great solution for businesses that want to preserve anything, absolutely anything, digital, physical. Let's take this in another turn. I'm curious about something that Earl said earlier in the discussion about businesses at times will not think that they're housing anything valuable. if we get breached, that's fine. All we do is make jam and jelly here. We just sell it at Saturday markets, whatever it might be. Or they can be a startup that, is just getting moving, seeing some momentum, whatever it may be. There does appear to be some sentiment that this cybersecurity stuff really doesn't apply to me. So if you can kind of speak through maybe who it applies to, but also maybe the business advantages of getting a cybersecurity program in place, regardless of maybe feeling like they need to defend their data, but more of a market position to show strength and concern over data and to be a leader. So if you wouldn't mind kind of speaking to that, Earl.
Yeah, I'm glad I got this question. Thank you, Tara. This is
You're
something that I'm really passionate about. Actually, and if you don't mind, I want to just back up 1 second before I go into that question, and just a couple of quick, pieces of information on this House Bill 80. First of all, it does include an organization creating what is called a written information security program, or a WISP, along with that written information or that written incident response plan, right? I do want to say that the major advantages of having that WISP and having that incident response plan, studies are showing that companies that have a game plan of how they're going, a business continuity game plan of how they're going to continue to do business and continue operations in the event of a cyber attack, their time to recovery is generally 1/10 of the time of businesses who are not prepared. So as JR's mentioned, when you're prepared and you can recover in 24 to 48 hours, and look, we deal with companies here in Utah alone who in an 8-hour day, if they are down, they will lose millions, if not tens of millions of dollars of revenue, right? And so if that timeline has suddenly stretched from 24 hours or 48 hours to 2 to 4 weeks, you can imagine, that the financial impacts. Certainly you want to be looking at cyber insurance, but that's a whole nother topic, and that's getting even harder to get unless you can prove that you are a responsible steward of the data that you house and store and transact. And that is part of creating that written information security policy. Part of an incident response plan also requires or includes how you notify those entities that have had data affected in your breach, right? And actually law now requires, law and regulatory compliance bodies require that notification. Okay, so 4 or 5 years ago, companies used to brush it under the rug and try to walk on ho hum and pretend that nothing ever happened. You open yourself to significant legalities in that in that case now. If you've had a breach, you have to notify, and this is why Jeff alluded to it. But this is why you need a cyber attorney on your side, a breach coach. So a prominent local, probably realistically one of the best cyber attorneys in the United States is here in Salt Lake City. Jeff and I work with him quite often. You as well, Tara, fantastic guy. He was recently telling me about a situation with a client where they had a breach. They were going to release notification to their entire client base, which included tens of thousands of businesses that they were going to notify. Before notifying, they got a hold of him. He took a look at everything, worked with the forensic IT firm, that was working on figuring out what data had been breached. And they were able to legally reduce that notification requirement from tens of thousands of companies to a few hundred. So the collateral damage, particularly to their public image, was significantly reduced and thereby reducing the financial impact of that to their organization, right? These are some of the important reasons that you want to have these written information security programs and the incident response plans. On to your question, Tara. So first of all, if you are a business that in any way has any data that is considered at all sensitive, if it contains what is called PII, or personally identifiable information, or PHI, any health sort of records, of any individuals, And those can be employees, those can be partners, those can be clients. If you store any contact information whatsoever, name, address, phone number, email addresses, most definitely if you're storing financial information, credit cards, bank accounts for payroll, HR data about your employees, you are a target and you are at risk. It doesn't matter how small or how big you are. The smaller you are, the easier and quicker that a hacker is going to get into your environment. And so while the payload is oftentimes significantly less for them, if they can get into your environment in 15 minutes versus getting into a target over months of orchestrated breach, right? It makes sense for them to quickly steal some data, either hold you ransom or to sell that data on the dark web for a profit. And so every business, from a business that is a single solo entrepreneur to maybe 3 or 4, 5 different people working in that organization, to a business that has, thousands or tens of thousands of employees, is at risk. Now, I want to shift this because generally, in this modern world of threat landscape, we talk a lot about risk, which is important. We talk about mitigating risk, but I'm here to tell you that as this situation has evolved over the past 12 to 15 years, the senior business leaders that are generally not involved in the day-to-day technology of the organization, they become somewhat numb to that risk. And so I want to talk about a different angle here, and that is the opportunity. And this is something that many businesses don't even recognize or realize that is out there. But I can tell you firsthand from personal experience with businesses that we deal with on a daily basis, that more mature businesses that are getting serious about their data governance programs, and their vendor management programs, are now requiring any company that they do business with to attest to them or show them attestation from third parties that they are responsible stewards of the data. So that if they're going to transact or store any data of that company, they can count on them to not place that data at high risk, right? And so we constantly see, companies coming to us with these large documents from a company that they're trying to land a contract with, where you've got to go through 18,000 checkboxes of, hey, these are our data security practices and these are the things we do. And the reality is that 95% of these companies aren't even remotely prepared to go through this sort of an audit or a risk assessment and to be able to attest we are responsible stewards of our data and your data, and therefore we can sign that contract, right? And so we're seeing actively significant amount of companies right here in Utah that are missing out on significant business opportunity because they are not being responsible stewards of the data. They don't have, and look, if you have that written information security program in place, right? You have that written incident response program in place, and one of those bigger fish gets on the line, you can hand that to them. So it's a really good, and if you have seals of regulatory compliance, you can hand those things to them, and you can first of all have a far more significant position of competitive advantage in an opportunity because you are being good stewards of the data that you store and transact, and you can demonstrate to them, hey, you can trust us, right? You can trust us with that data. And the reality is lots of bigger organizations now, that you might want to do business with, they will not do business with you unless you can attest that third parties have reviewed your information security practices, and that the likelihood that you are going to expose them to a breach is extremely low. And so the opportunity exists in we can position ourselves in an entirely different category in our market. It is a competitive advantage, a position of competitive advantage, that you can go to the market with in your marketing campaigns and materials of, hey, we have these, these regulatory compliance body, certifications, such as SOC 2, such as CMMC, and we could name off dozens of them at this point, right? So therefore, not only does it expose you to more revenue opportunities and probably more significant, larger revenue opportunities with bigger organizations, but it also exposes you to opportunities to make more profit off of that revenue, right? Because you are a responsible steward of data, you can charge a higher premium for your products or services. And therefore, you can increase your margins, allowing you to reinvest, more heavily into your business and develop your products and services. So there is a significant opportunity in choosing to have robust cyber and compliance programs within your organization.
So it sounds like more than being mandated or required to have a compliance program, it just might be a good business decision to go after the market and be a good custodian of data and shine in that way against your competitors. I like that a lot. That puts us in a positive spin. If any of you have gone out and have looked at Utah House Bill 80 yet, you'll find that there's a penetration test on there. So they're looking for penetration testing and security assessments. We have talked about security assessments a little bit. We haven't touched on penetration testing, and that's something that WebCheck Security specializes in. They do a lot of those semi-annually, annually for companies, I think even quarterly for some. Jeff, can you explain to us what penetration testing is and why that's so valuable for businesses to do, why that is inside of this House bill?
It's penetration testing is a little bit different than vulnerability scanning. Vulnerability scanning is automated software that checks your firewall and checks against known threats. But a penetration test is actually a person that will try to get into your systems, get into your data and move laterally and try to find the weaknesses in your systems and document them so that you then know what needs to be addressed and fixed. So it's an actual live event of an individual trying to penetrate into your data, into your network, into your assets. And if you do a penetration test, you get a plan, you have a business continuance recovery plan that JR's talked about. You put all those together, you document it, you would be well within the HB 80 safe harbor. But I really got to say, to Earl's point, that's exactly what I was thinking, is that I know, we're a risk mitigation company and compliance and cyber advisory firm, and everyone here does that for their clients. But I really am glad to hear, Earl, that you mentioned the positive side or spin of this, which is there is risk. You do need to mitigate it. You do need to plan against it. But looking at the positives, that it can be the positive business driver it can be for your business, that you can differentiate yourself instead of everybody trying to differentiate on price or differentiate on a product feature or some other thing. If you can differentiate yourself with your clients, your partners in the market, and you communicate that, the cyber can really be a business driver if you do it right and you kind of get your hands around it and open up opportunities. I mean, we just had a client that got that long questionnaire, Earl. Costco, they just got the opportunity to put their products in Costco's nationwide, and Costco came to them and said, before we do business with you and we expose, since we're going to be touching digitally, we want to make sure that your organization isn't exposing us to risk. And if, so then we got a quick phone call and they said, help us do this. But the point of that is doing that proactively, you prepare yourself for opportunities that can really be advantageous to your business.
That's wonderful, Jeff. Thank you for providing that insight. Now we're inside of about 4 minutes. So I'm just going to ask a quick question of each of you. And I apologize because I'm going to put you all on the spot a little bit, and maybe your advice is different. I'll ask myself the question to kind of, to frame it a little bit. a business owner comes to advice with you. They ask you advice over coffee. I'm a business owner. I have data to protect. I'm nervous about my cybersecurity hygiene and posture. Where do I start? If I were asked that question today, I would start by looking up the Utah House Bill 80. And I would look at the areas that I'm weak and strong and what I could do and implement same day. So there's the incident response, the WISP, the written incident response plan. How do we respond? Have a meeting about what you can take care of same day that you only need your internal teams to discuss and figure out. And then from there, I would start pulling in, experts in the field such as Nexus IT. I would pull in perpetual storage. I would pull in web check security, but sometimes companies don't know who to go to first. I see an MSP as a consultant in the field who can take in the information and then decide what we're able to do in-house with hardware and solutions, then also where you need to bring in specialists to complete, say, a penetration test. How do you store physical documents and artifacts? So that's how I would answer that question. But I'd love to hear from JR on, if you were asked the same question, where do I start, what your advice would be. Mm-hmm. And I apologize, guys, we only have 2 minutes left, so talk quickly. I apologize.
High speed, low drag.
Yep.
So in that type of exercise, the answer to the question is you need to divide up the areas of responsibility between internal expertise and then where it makes much more sense, where it is efficient and from cost and from timeline to get the right partners involved, other organizations who have built specialty practices to be able to execute outcomes towards your business in a very rapid form, nearly immediately, that you can consume in a service format is one of those keys. You got to just get some of those lowest hanging fruit executed. You got to protect the user identities around multi-factor authentication. You got to get the right backups in place. You got to prevent data exfiltration, and you got to have the recovery plan. If those sort of big four are done, that's enough bang for your buck to be well ahead of the curve and on the way to being eligible for safe harbor provisions and just executing.
Fantastic. Well said, JR. Jeff Smith, go ahead, sir.
In the short time we have, I'd say bringing in someone from the outside to work with your internal team to give some outside perspective, and like a fractional information security officer, that you don't have to hire them on staff full time, but they can come in and be the coach and the strategy, and your team can be the execution of it.
Yeah.
Or to bring in a firm like Nexus, somebody that can help you execute on the plan.
Someone from the outside. And we haven't talked about the fractional CISOs or the CISO's role, so I'm glad that you brought that up. Okay, Earl, what's your advice?
It's no different than earlier, and that is that most businesses honestly don't even know where they're at, right? So you've got to do that initial assessment, which includes a penetration test from a firm like Web Check Security. You've got to have either, if your internal team is trained and capable to do a comprehensive risk assessment, great. If they're not, then partner with somebody who is, and bring them in to show you where your vulnerabilities are and to put together an action plan and begin that phase of, this is our highest priority. We're going to tick off the boxes one by one. Maybe it's an 18-month process. Maybe it's a 36-month process, but you got to get that assessment done and put together an action plan to start getting your cybersecurity in order.
Fantastic. I think that gives everyone that listens to this webinar enough to get started. You can reach out to any of our organizations if you have questions or need further advice. You've got Earl Foote, CEO and founder of Nexus IT. I myself am from Nexus IT. You've got JR Maycock from Perpetual Storage Inc. And then you've got Jeff Smith of Web Check Security. Thank you to Salt Lake City Chamber for having us. It's been a pleasure. And thank you to the business owners and leaders from Salt Lake City and beyond that have joined us today. Appreciate your time. Take care.